Welcome to Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages, with your host, Matthew Shipp. This is the podcast for all of those who are involved in the agriculture all the way to the distribution of beverages. And now your host, Matthew Shipp.
Hello, this is Matthew Shipp with Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages. I'm your host, and today I am here with Upshot Coffee with Conor Van Buskirk. How you doing today, Conor?
Hey guys, how you doing? Thanks for having me, Matt.
No problem. Thanks for coming on the show. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of came into the coffee business and where you've been, where you're going?
Yeah, so I'm, middle-aged man living in the suburbs, and I'm married. I've been married for, it'll be going on 20 years this coming March. I've got a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old, both boys. So we are all somewhat involved in the business here and there. So it's kind of a family-run business that we care about deeply. Our family got involved with Upshot Coffee because we actually started out by owning 4 different chocolate franchises here in St. Charles. Through that process, I taught myself how to make chocolate outside of what the franchise taught us, which was pretty basic. Coating strawberries, making barks, making clusters, very simple things. I wanted to teach myself how to make caramels, truffles, all these other things. As I kind of got bored with just putting boxes on the shelf, I wanted to understand what I was selling better. So I bought some cookbooks off of Amazon and just started making stuff in the back kitchen and teaching myself what chocolate really was. And, there was things about it that really excited me at that time. Chocolate was kind of taking a turn where it was becoming more like a microbrewery where we were infusing a bunch of interesting stuff. There was a lot of creativity happening in it at that point. That was, 12, 13 years ago when I started that journey. And where we're at today in chocolate is in coffee and beer is, it's just exploded with the creativity in that. So we were in the back kitchen teaching myself all of that stuff. I got to a certain point where I was kind of actually really good at making this chocolate, and it didn't really fit within inside what the franchise did, right? And franchises are tricky. Either you can only sell certain things in them, right? So we ended up going and leasing a spot in Cottleville, which was right down the street from where my chocolate was. And I ended up opening a chocolate bar. So we ended up putting the truffles that I was hoping to sell, the barks, the Nutella, the caramels, the marshmallows, all the fun stuff that I was making. And we put it inside a concept that had coffee with it as well, that was focusing on single origin black coffee and espresso. And then we had a bar attached to it that was focusing on wines and spirits in the same way. So we could kind of treat everything similarly in order to have all these unique items that we could kind of create fun items underneath one roof and let our customers experience them. And that was also a way that I thought, if I just open up a truffle store in Cottleville or St. Charles and expect to somehow stay in business, it's going to be pretty tough. So part of the reason we added coffee and alcohol and food to it was to make sure that I could sell enough truffles to stay in business. And then over that 7-year period of operating this chocolate bar from, 7 a.m. till 1 a.m. in the morning, I realized that I really loved the coffee side. I loved the community around the coffee side. I loved the employees. All the things I loved about chocolate, the single origin, tasting the terroir, all those things were very similar in coffee. And it was something that I could, produce every single day in a consistent form. And when we kind of gotten overwhelmed with VBs of being open just 24/7 and everything that entailed, we really wanted to focus in on kind of one side of the business. And so we chose the coffee side, and that's when we rebranded to Upshot Coffee back in 2019. And from 2019 to 2023, we've been all about coffee, and that's kind of what Upshot has been ever since then.
Oh, that's awesome. So that the chocolate became, just from your playing with it, just kind of was a very natural progression into coffee because of the flavor, the palates.
Yeah, and it's all such a random journey. I mean, I when we bought the chocolate stores, I didn't even eat chocolate. I didn't care about chocolate, right? Like this is something I try to tell young entrepreneurs that tell me they want to get into business all the time, or young employees that talk to me about how they wanted to get into business all the time. Is one thing I see a lot of people doing consistently that I did not do. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but when there's an opportunity that presents itself, right? Like you keep telling people, I want to own a business. Then someone puts a business in your lap and says, okay, here it is, go run it. Are you ready for that opportunity, right? And that's kind of how my life has operated up to this point. Is we had said that when we got married, me and my wife got married, we wanted to own a business. We didn't have a connection to any business, really. We didn't have an expertise in anything. We were just working along and trying to figure out how we were going to make that come true. And at that point, my wife's mother had worked for chocolate stores in St. Louis, Mavrocco's back in the day, and then chocolate. And she goes, I think he might be franchised. You want me to reach out and see if I can get you something? And so through that random thing of just being open to an opportunity of owning a business, right? And we didn't really care what it did. We just wanted the opportunity to have a chance to succeed or fail and get in the game. And that's one thing is like most of the opportunities that have come in my life have just been saying yes to an opportunity that didn't necessarily make a lot of sense to me right away, but it was an opportunity. And with opportunity, we can do a lot.
So you just jumped at that opportunity with just a couple steps ahead, have an idea where to go with.
We start out with franchises. We start out in chocolate. We don't even really care about chocolate. Through that process, though, I learned to love chocolate, and I learned what I love about chocolate is I love single origin dark chocolate, right? Mm-hmm. And even within that, then I learned that I love kind of floral and fruit forward and all the intricate, delicate tasting notes in that dark chocolate, right? Don't get me wrong, I'm going to mow down a million Reese's peanut butter cups. It's probably still my favorite candy. I love Skittles, right? But I don't really consider that chocolate. I consider that just candy.
Yeah.
When we talk about chocolate, like a 64% single origin Madagascar that tastes like raspberry and lavender, that's what gets me excited. The same thing that gets me excited about coffee.
Okay. So since you've been through it, seems a couple of times, talk about that transition from chocolate to the coffee business. What are some of the early challenges you faced?
I would say the early challenge we faced is when we first did the brand over, we had really no food, just a couple pastries. And I realized real quick that just selling, like a scone and a cinnamon roll alongside the coffee was not going to keep me in business. Mm-hmm. We had to have more focus on providing some kind of food element to go with the coffee. And we had to continue to grow the way that we sold bagged coffee, which eventually turned into us realizing, as much fun as it was being a guest roaster, it's at a certain point we believed we had to start roasting in-house so we could then start to wholesale and distribute our coffee. But early on, we just realized, okay, this is a lot of fun, but how do we make money here? And so at that point, then we started to look at what items do we need to add and what systems do we need to add to be able to send out a breakfast sandwich with coffee, right? And get our average order up and also give people a good reason to meet here. Not everyone just wants to meet over a black coffee or a hot tea, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you want a food item with it. So just consistently learning from our customers what they want, what they need, how we can continue to move the coffee. Everything kind of serves a purpose of moving more coffee and moving more really, really good coffee.
You just mentioned serving your customers. How do you determine really what your customers are after in this business?
We listen. Right? If people are telling us that they hate this or hate that, or they love this, love that, we're going to lean into those things. We also have certain things that we will or won't do. Mm-hmm. So we've got hard lines in the sand that this is our priority. This is something we're not going to do. We're not going to go into necessarily frozen blended drinks, right? That's a hard line in the sand. We'll stick with our iced lattes. There are hard lines in the sand that we don't go past, but a lot of it is really just looking at what is selling really well, what's coming into the market that we think our customers would enjoy that maybe no one else is offering or they haven't had it done well yet. And then it's just figuring out what makes employees happy to make and what makes customers happy to drink. And if we can match happy employees with happy customers, we win.
Absolutely, every time. Having those hard lines, does that kind of also help form your client base, your customer base, and your culture around that?
Yeah. I mean, I think certainly like having the things that you stand for and the things you won't do helps. We want soft edges around all that because we're not looking to say, hey, only 10% of the people can enjoy what we do, right? We've got a wide variety of things on our menu. So there's hard lines, and then there's also working within those hard lines to make sure that we're not just running everyone off.
Okay. So you talked about the opportunities of entrepreneurs, taking those opportunities, jumping at those opportunities. Once they're kind of in the thick of it, do you have any advice for the early entrepreneurs kind of facing some of these challenges and things you've learned?
I would say my biggest mistake, and I think you've been here for part of it, you've been helping me clean it up, is when you're a new entrepreneur, everything excites you. And especially if you have a little success early on, you think that you can do a lot of different things all at one time. And I would say the key thing that I would tell myself every day to this day, I wake up, I drink my coffee, and I remind myself of this, right? And then I tell people all day long so I don't forget, but it's be focused. Learn how to do one thing really, really well and execute it well. Don't do that okay, and then keep adding things to it to try and make it okay. Figure out what your key basis is. Do that really well. Be focused on that, and don't add anything to your plate until you know how to win with that very focused
All right. Oh, and just to disclose, Conor here at Upshot is one of my clients I've had for the longest time, and I've been working with them on their efficiencies and problem solving. So I'll get into that one day in a future podcast, but just wanted to let everybody know that I've been working with Conor for a while now.
And it's been a great relationship.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's get into the journey your coffee takes now. So I'm really interested in the processes, as you know, and the journey your coffee takes from harvest to pour. Before we get into it, I know we're going to get into a little bit of your trip you had. You literally you traveled with your coffee from literally harvest to from roasting to pour. But go ahead and talk first about how you source your ingredients and how do you apply your specific Upshot creativity to creating the coffee that you create versus everybody else is also buying coffee and roasting it as well.
Yeah, I mean, sourcing, roasting, and selling coffee in reality, I mean, it's pretty common and pretty simple, right? So really where you make a difference is all the little intricate things that you do in the preparation, the way that you sample roast, the people you source from, those relationships. And as you get better and better at those things, then you can put a lot of things in place that actually make you a little bit different. Essentially, the way we're doing things right now is we've got multiple importers that we work with. We have some that we get more of our base espresso from, and we have some that we get really high-end experimentals from. One of the things that we did early on was we got very excited about experimentals, as everyone did, and we went really all in on that, right? And those are all very expensive coffees. So as we look at balancing out our menu, we go, okay, how do we provide tremendous value of an excellent coffee alongside this experimental, but not have everything on our menu be $7-8 for a black coffee? How do we source exceptional coffees that are also value driven? That's one of the things that we've been working hard on now, and really where that comes in. The key to that is finding all these importers, finding out which ones have different relationships that serve the purposes that you're specifically looking for. Because not every coffee serves the same purpose, right? It's going in an espresso blend. It's going to be a different purpose than something that's going to be a $10 pour over on our menu. First, we're going to start with what is the purpose of this coffee. Then we're going to import it through those, or we're going to talk to our importers. We're going to request samples. We're going to sample roast through a bunch of samples. What we do here at the lab is we've got an Ikawa sample roaster that does 50 grams of coffee. You can create your own coffee curve profile. It's an air roaster, different than when we do a 10 kilo batch on our production roaster. This is an air roaster that does everything by circulating hot air around the beans. Versus when we put it in our drum roaster, our production roaster, it's got a cast iron drum in it that is indirectly heated from gas flame underneath and keeps that temperature inside there. So it's a little bit different in that the way the Ikawa works is we can actually send a curve to it, and it can utilize AI to do all the movements inside of it for us based on our curve versus our production roaster, where we're literally sitting there making gas adjustments by hand, airflow adjustments by hand, temperature adjustments by hand. So it's very unique and very different. And I would say kind of like the first big step of separating someone that is going from just being a home roaster to being a production roaster or a good roaster would be someone that gets very disciplined about the way that they sample, roast, and source.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you're getting AI into your coffee already. So it's here, guys.
Yep. I mean, it's one of those deals where through this sample roaster that we have, this Ikawa, it's really cool because when you first start, they've got a bunch of curves that are preloaded in it that are from different competition roasters and different people you've heard of around the country, to where you can start to get familiar with the way that they would sample roast and the way that sample roasting works. And then as you get going through it, you evolve it to where you have a curve that serves your purposes. So our quality control guy here, Drew Horton, created, after working on this for about 6 months, he created his own curve that is specific to sample roasting every single one of Upshot Coffee's first sample roasted coffees.
That's where it all
started. So we started out by just using everyone else's curves to figure it all out. And then throughout the process, we really learned what makes an Upshot Coffee an Upshot Coffee. He was able to create a curve which is essentially tracking the bean temp, airflow, gas flow, all of that. We created a template for a sample roast that is specific to Upshot, and now we can identify insanely good Upshot coffees that fit in within what we do pretty quickly by using the same thing on every single one of them.
All right, that's a great explanation of how you've used your own creativity, used other people's, stood on the shoulders of those before you, and created something uniquely yours. That is awesome. Are there what are some of your biggest challenges through that process from sourcing to the producing that you kind of come up to?
Coffee's tricky because the farmer can mess up the coffee. The person at the first port can mess up the coffee by leaving it sitting too long, damaging the bags, having things properly sealed in the grain pro bags. And then it can sit on the ocean for too long and get screwed up. Then it can get screwed up at the port when it lands in America. Then it can get screwed up at the warehouse. Any of these things can mess up a coffee that you sample roasted from the farm and it was beautiful. By the time you get it, it's slightly different or it's just not good, right? And there's a possibility that happens. A lot of things can go wrong in the supply chain. And then once we get it, obviously we have to be very good at sample roasting it. We have to be very good at consistently roasting it to be the best of what it is. And then we have to distribute it to partners, whether it's our cafes or people we wholesale coffee with. And then they've got to prepare it properly. And anywhere along that chain, if something's off, it could be a mediocre or bad coffee. So you're depending on, I don't know how many dozens of people throughout the supply chain to make sure everything stays to where it should be, to where by the time I make you that pour over in your cup, it's representative of what it should be.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be a very unique dance, I guess, before it gets into your cup.
You depend on a lot of people, and a lot of hands touch it, and there's a lot of mistakes that can happen. So to me, it's pretty amazing how well the supply chain works, considering.
I mentioned earlier, you've just recently had a trip to Brazil, and so you literally walked the walk with a harvest to pour. So you've even got the opportunity to create from harvest your own coffee to creating a couple of your own unique not blends, but what would you call them?
Experimental processes.
Okay, and bring those with you and try those out. Could you just give just kind of a brief talk about your trip?
Yeah, so we had a unique opportunity come up where we've got a friend that has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu dojo in O'Fallon, St. Peter's area, whose dad also just happens to have a coffee farm in a region of Brazil that produces a ton of coffee. Through our conversations with them, we were introduced through a mutual friend who's like, well, you got a coffee farm and Conor roast coffee, and you both are looking to partner up with people like this, so let me just put you two together. We started to talk to him, and he actually brought us, they were wanting to import green coffee into America. They imported in like Dubai, Europe, it's going everywhere else, but they have not really broken through the American market yet, the U.S. market. He brought me 6 samples of coffee. I assumed when they came in, being as though he owned a dojo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu martial arts place, and just sitting here in St. Peter's, and I'd never heard of him, I assumed this coffee would be pretty substandard. So we roasted it, and we didn't even taste it. We just wanted to do a blind cupping with him and just do honest feedback and show him on the cupping table that it was good, bad, whatever. And we were kind of expecting it to be mediocre to bad. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just typically what our stereotypical thought was. Mm-hmm. But when we cut this up, a bunch of stuff jumped off the table and was delicious. And we come to find out that his partner on the other end, although Joao's brand new to this and it's not his main gig, he's supporting a friend. His friend that's on the other side of Brazil that does all the importing to all the other countries has grown up there. His stepdad was in the business, and he takes it very seriously, has a ton of relationships, and is phenomenal at his job. When we found that out, we're like, all right, well, let's see. If you guys want to get your coffee going here, A, how can we help you with that? And then B, we want to learn more about coffee, and we want to be able to run some experimentation projects on our own, just for our knowledge. One, because we're all a bunch of nerds, so the idea of getting to do it's really cool.
Yeah. And
it's not everyone that has a coffee farm that just says, yeah, come here, pick my cherries, and do your own fermentation experiments and whatever, have a run of it. And that was a pretty unique opportunity. So once again, we talk about opportunities, random stuff, a guy from a dojo in St. Peter's with a coffee farm in Brazil, we say yes. We end up on a farm doing experiments. Don't be shy to say yes. Throughout this process, we realized this coffee was really good. We started to score it for him and give him some different leads that he could try to start to move it in America. And then at the same time, we were like, well, we really want to do our first farm visit because we had not done a farm visit in our history. They're expensive. You've got to know the right people, and you've got to just get it started. So we were like, all right, if we can go there and help your dad. And at the same time, backtracking a little bit, his dad had gone through some health issues and he hadn't been able to keep up with his farm phenomenally well. So part of it was he was like, hey, can you guys come over here, check out this region, set up some relationships, meet my partner, meet all these people in coffee if we're going to do this. And then also, can you guys just meet my dad, see the state of the farm and give him some advice? Even though we're not agricultural people, we've got some basic knowledge, and just give him some advice on how we can kind of get this farm back where it needs to be and get it moving, and then we can help my dad, recreate his income. We ended up putting those plans in place, and we flew over to Brazil, and that was quite an adventure. You should go back and listen to the Upshot Bean Pod podcast on Brazil Recap Part 2. But it was a wild experience. We ended up flying there and staying with his dad for 5 days up in the mountains of Brazil. We ended up picking a bunch of cherries and eating meals with him, and then being able to do our own fermentation. So for those of you that are just trying to picture in your head what this process is, coffee is a fruit that grows on a tree. So we're on this farm. There's all these coffee trees. They have all these red and yellow cherries on them, which is what coffee looks like when it's ripe. And the coffee is actually the seed inside that fruit. What we ended up doing was taking 5-kilo white buckets and just walking directly up into the farm and just picking what we assumed were ripe coffee cherries based on the color. And our goal with that was to pick a bunch of stuff and then to be able to do some fermentation experiments to see what we could get out of this coffee and just to learn experimentation on our side and have a little bit of fun. So we ended up picking 6 5-kilo buckets of cherries, and then we ended up putting those in buckets in an anaerobic process. And in one, we had sugarcane that we harvested from the farm. And another one, we had oranges that we harvested from the farm that we were fermenting with. We were using different white wine yeast, different stuff. 6 different wild experiments of fermenting these coffee cherries to see if, when it's all said and done, and this coffee comes back to us and we sample roast it here, whether these were really good ideas or whether we have a lot left to learn. But if we can figure out how to turn this coffee into really high-end experimental coffee, the goal is to then go back to Joao's dad and be able to get the price of his coffee up on his farm to stabilize their income there. And if we can do that with him, then we can potentially do that with a lot of his neighbors. And then we can start to set up some direct trade relationships where not everything has to go through an importer, and we can get more coffee money directly to the coffee farmer.
That's great. Yeah, I've read somewhere that the coffee farmer sees about 1% of what they grow in profit back to them. So yeah, that is a great thing you're doing to help them out.
Well, and part of it was being on that farm. We were able to just talk to them, and like the way that they measure success out there is the amount of bags you're able to harvest off your farm. Mm-hmm. Since they all in this area currently are mostly selling for commodity, it's what is the commodity price, and so they're not really negotiating based on quality. They're not really necessarily growing based on quality. They're just growing for mass volume. So instead of having 50, 70 kilo bags to sell, they've got 150 because that's their money for the entire year. And what we're trying to look at now is, okay, how do we change that mindset to not producing the most amount of coffee, although producing more is not a bad thing, but how do we get these small family farms, which may be only 10 or 15 acres, maybe only a portion of that is actually growing coffee, and the family needs to get the revenue off of that to support themselves all year long. How do we get these small farms to produce higher value coffee to where they're not taking a risk of just running out of money every single year and not being able to afford to keep their family farm going and end up having to sell out? So how do we get the price of green coffee up so that they can expect $3 green instead of $1.95? Like, how do we just start to make little margin changes that bring the economy of that area back up? And then we're able to introduce really unique, good coffee to our customers and introduce these farmers to our customers.
Yeah. And again, if you guys want to hear more about their crazy journey, they had a unique journey. I would definitely highly recommend you guys take a listen to their podcast. It's the Bean Pod by Upshot. And speaking of Upshot, what's in the name?
It's actually a noun, and it stands for the end result.
The end result, and that's what you get.
And that was kind of when we were rebranding from VB Van Buskirk Artisanal Chocolate Bar, which then became VB Chocolate Bar, which I didn't really want to just make VB coffee. When we were looking at that, it's the end result, right? That's what Upshot stands for. And when we look at the supply chain of coffee and all the moving pieces in it, Upshot is the end result of what ends up in your cup. So that's where the name came from. That's what it means. Is there may be 400 people that touch this thing before it gets to us, but we control what's the end result.
You guys are responsible for the end result. That is great. Going back to Brazil really quick, what would you say, how did that trip affect the way you see coffee now?
One, I picked coffee by hand off a tree in the mountains, which, by the way, you're standing at an angle because you're not in a pasture. Cows aren't grazing here. This is the side of a mountain, and it's got coffee trees on it. So you're literally standing there, generally with a bucket in one hand, holding yourself towards the tree with the other hand, and then attempting to pick ripe cherries off of this tree into this bucket. And I would say the most shocking thing was after an hour of picking, we were a third of the way through the bucket. When you think about the amount of volume of coffee that just Upshot roasts and sells through our fairly, moderately sized little coffee company here in St. Charles, one of the things that was shocking to me was the amount of labor that goes into picking just enough coffee cherries to create 2 little beans that we can then roast.
Wow.
Like, it is shocking to me. And at one point, I dropped a bucket and it spilled down the hill, and it was like an hour's worth of work, and I almost cried. Just like the thought of what it takes to fill one of those 70-kilo bags with coffee beans, it's shocking to me the amount of labor that goes in on that end to get us just the green coffee.
So this is all hand picking. There's no machines doing this.
Not on our coffee. Specialty coffee, you want to pick it when it's ripe, so you can't very well have a machine come shake the entire tree. because it will knock everything off, not just the ripe. Also, those machines generally need a flat ground to work on. So anything that's on the side of a mountain at higher elevation, where we are considered specialty coffee for the most part, is going to be handpicked. So you literally have humans walking around with a tarp, with buckets, handpicking ripe stuff, and it is tedious as all get out, and the conditions are pretty rough.
So they really mean it when they say specialty coffee.
Yep.
Wow. All right. Speaking of, and now we're going to kind of get to the pour. You've mentioned your roasting, and in fact, since we're talking about the pour, what are we drinking here?
This is a Finca Belen Pink 64 Pink Bourbon sun-dried natural out of Colombia.
Wow. What I love about these coffees is they actually change and sometimes even get better as they cool off. You have just like a unique, they kind of dance differently. They're very fruit forward.
That's the interesting thing about coffee is every degree it kind of changes. Tasting it from hot to cold can be a completely different coffee from hot to cold. And one of the things we focus on is trying to make sure that from hot to cold, there are no defects anywhere in that process. And it is beautiful, even though it is changing, it's beautiful from beginning to end.
Yeah.
There's a lot of coffees that we've had where it's really good hot, really mediocre cold, or the reverse, right? And so one of the things we've been really focused on the last few months is making from hot to cold, we're controlling.
Yeah, most of my experiences with coffee when I first came into just really drinking coffee is as it gets cold, you just abandon it because it just doesn't taste good anymore. So this is a really cool. Isn't that also your push towards drinking black coffee? Seems to be a very important thing to Upshot. These coffees that even though they're cooling off on you, the flavor changes, but it's still really good flavor.
Yep. And I would say that the reason that like I find myself continually drawn to black coffee is I actually am interested in tasting what is unique about that coffee. And so anytime we add dairy or we add sugar or we add syrup to it, right, we're making a beautiful beverage. And I sell a lot of those. I have no problem with it, and I like them myself. But when we talk about coffee, to me, coffee is that black coffee where you are tasting what that soil, what that tree, what that farmer, what that roaster, the essence of what that bean actually is. And what's wild about that is if you can distill that into something, it's basically a one-time deal, right? Because you're never going to have the exact same climate and soil conditions. And I think that's what makes single origin so interesting is like you can fall in love with a farm and a region and a coffee and a varietal, and you can enjoy it for a month while you have it, right? And then you can order the exact same coffee from the same farm at the same time next year, and it's going to be a different coffee. So it's ever evolving. And once you find something really special, you're probably only going to have that one time in your life. And that's kind of the romance of it. So for me, tasting what's in the coffee naturally is the reason I got into it, which is the same reason I got into chocolate. My chocolate experience ended up to where I was doing bean to bar. We were literally just importing cocoa, roasting it, and grinding it down, and then once again showing people what was actually in the chocolate versus just doing candy bars full of caramel or full of crystallized ginger and all the fun things that you can do. Like even my chocolate journey ended up with high cocoa content, dark chocolate, where you were tasting what was in the terroir. And that's where this coffee journey is too. It's exciting to understand what that actual product is. That's what gets me up in the morning. It is something new that I'll never get to experience again. That's really special, that someone worked really hard to do and is probably going to be lost on most people.
That story you told, there's another beverage in the beverage industry that has been telling that story for a long time. And I really find it interesting that now it's coming into coffee. I'm talking about wine, of course, is the land that's growing from the grapes. And you can taste all that just, from region to region, taste the soil, taste the mineralization in the wine. And now that I'm hearing, really first time I'm hearing the similar parallel put into coffee, and it is true. The coffees roasted this way or sourced this way definitely have a different story to tell. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that parallel now coming into coffee in that way, where it's always been traditionally with wines.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to move from there and actually want to get back into Upshot as a business real quick. How important would you say communication is with your team to the success of Upshot?
Communication and systems and a chain of command is pretty much everything. And it's something that we've learned over the years, and it's something we're still improving on, quite honestly.
All right. And what would you say from your team, what is your team best at?
I would say right now at the roasting level, the excitement of turning out new coffees consistently that are value driven. We've done a very good job at that. And I would say at the cafe level, we've put a big focus on just customer service, making people feel valued, making sure that they get their drinks on time, their food tickets are efficient. There's the romance of coffee where like art and everything never stops, and it's all about that. And then there's the restaurant side of Upshot Coffee, with this scone has to be out in a certain amount of time, and this latte needs to be out in a certain amount of time. There's just the realities of that. Over on this side, on the restaurant side, I would say balancing efficiency with insanely good customer service has been a strength on the cafe side. On the roasting side, high-end experimentals and value-driven coffees are what we kind of focus on.
All right.
And we're starting to work more and more on blends. I think there's a hole in the market right now that is taking these really high-end single origin coffees and creating unique specific blends with them versus only single origin or only dumping crappy coffee blends. But I think we can use blends to create layered coffees that are really, really fascinating.
Okay. And you kind of segued very nicely into my next question. What are some of the trends you're seeing in the industry in coffee?
Well, I mean, I think you'd have to be comatose not to see a drive-through coffee shop on every corner.
Yeah.
So that's certainly a trend. I think coffee, a lot of people see it as something that is convenient and it's just a commodity. So I think those serve their purpose really well in making it basically like a gas station where you can drive through, not get out of your car like QT, get a coffee quick. It'll be simple. So that's certainly one trend. And then I would say the other trend is going to somewhere like what Upshot does, where you're getting to see what coffee really is.
Okay, great.
And focus on that quality and focus on the experience. And I think they're both exciting and they work really well together.
All right. So final couple questions here. So if somebody wants to start a coffee shop, a roastery, now, what advice would you give them at this point?
The same advice I give people all the time, because people say that to me all the time, right? And it's a tough industry. It can be a low margin industry. It's one where there's labor issues, there's supply issues. It's challenging. So I always tell people, like, I know a lot of people want to be in coffee and they love the idea of coffee, and I think that is around the romanticism of being in a coffee shop. But before you go and put $750,000 of your money into building a cafe and a roastery to open it, go work for someone that you really care about and respect, that does a really good job similar to what you want to do. Work with them for a solid 2 years and make sure that it's really a fit for everything that comes along with it. Because the romance of what people think coffee is versus what it ends up being in day to day is very different. And so you've got to make sure that you're geared up for that, because you don't want to throw yourself into this and not understand what's coming behind it.
All right, great piece of advice.
And it's an extremely competitive industry too. So that's one thing is, like I said, you've got a shop opening on every corner at this point.
Mm-hmm.
What do you bring into the table?
Yeah, what uniquely is yours? And that's great advice, by the way. Two last questions, but I always like having fun with this one. I know coffees change here a lot, roasting through different things. Do you have a favorite, whether it's a blend or even in the past, one that's just always stood out to you and you can't wait to get back to?
There's a farmer in Colombia, Jairo Arcilio, and he had my favorite coffee last year, and pretty much everything we get from him is in my top coffee. So I would say a natural processed coffee from Jairo Arcilio. I'm probably saying that completely wrong, and I'm sorry if I am. From Colombia, Quindío, Colombia. That is typically where I find home runs every single year. I'm also just predisposed to really good Ethiopian naturals, and I'm finding that I'm really liking a lot of washed geishas.
Yeah, okay. Some stuff to look into, people. Finally, do you have any kind of events, promotions, or where should we find Upshot Coffee? Have we looking for it? Website, think of that.
So we've got weareupshotcoffee.com. You can order off of our website at any time. We've got our cafe in Cottleville. We've got our cafe over in St. Charles, across from St. Charles High. And then we've got our first licensed store we opened up in North Roads Church out in Moscow Mills. That is owned by North Roads Church and operated by them, but it is a full Upshot inside their cafe, open to the public. So you can find us at any of those 3 locations. And then we're getting ready to do a push into grocery. So hopefully we'll be at your local grocery store here in St. Louis, St. Charles area. We just say if you know anyone that's looking for a really good roaster of coffee and a really good support team at their cafe or their restaurant, or anyone that can utilize us, high-end gifts shop that would retail coffee, don't be shy to pass our name along or hit us up on DM. We appreciate every referral. We're just trying to do some really cool stuff and grow with our community.
Great. Thanks a lot. Just to kind of add, when we're talking about St. Charles, we're talking about St. Charles, Missouri. I didn't really follow up with that. We're just outside of St. Louis.
Yep.
And so just for people that aren't from the Missouri area, if you happen to be passing through, look up Upshot Coffee. All right, Conor, thanks a ton for your time. And this has been a great story, listening to the journey and your your journey through following coffee from Brazil all the way to your roastery and pouring it out. So thanks again, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you for your time, man. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages with Matthew Shipp. Check the show notes for our guest contact information. And connect with Matthew Shipp on LinkedIn today.